Welcome to Brain Break by Yoga Sangha. For our first week, we practice a type of meditation that focuses on our breath. And there is a technique of breathing meditation, one of the breathing techniques of meditation that I've learned from my Vipassana practice called Anapana meditation, which means mindfulness breathing. And why start with the breath? What's so special about the breath? And what is the relationship with our mental health? And are we still doing yoga when we just sit to watch the breath? These are the questions that this short lecture tackles on, and that I hope by the end gives us clarity of the why behind our sitting practice. And we treat our breath as like our superpower, a tool that allows us to dive within ourselves and explore our true self, which is only possible when we learn to use our breath to direct our mind. The Bhagavad Gita describes the tendency of the mind as follows: For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. By referring to the mind as a friend or an enemy, the Gita treats the mind as if it were something different from us. Many times it can feel as if someone else or even a whole group of people is carrying on elaborate dialogues up there that have little to do with our present reality. And the mind that isn't given proper attention and is allowed to run wild can cause havoc in our lives. The uncontrolled mind is the sole source of fear, stress, and anger in our lives. We've all had that experience of recalling instances where others might have physically, financially, or emotionally have hurt us, even though we tell ourselves that, oh, it's over, and that there's no need to continue to remember such circumstances. We find that the mind forcibly brings these thoughts back to the forefront of our consciousness. The mind lives within us and controls our thoughts, emotions, and our actions. We go to sleep with it every night and we wake up with it every morning. If we are going to spend that much time with someone, doesn't it make sense to develop a friendship with that individual? And so the question now arises: how do you develop a friendship with someone that you cannot see or touch or really even talk to? And so we begin understanding our mind through something that we can connect to. And later we do a sitting practice to cultivate that relationship. And over time, we hope grows stronger. When the bond becomes stronger, it's actually less of a struggle to befriend it. And so we talk about pranayama. Pranayama comes from the Sanskrit root word prana, meaning life force, and ayama, that means extension or expansion. So, whenever we speak about pranayama, we cultivate the effects of slow breathing, controlled and disciplined breathing that is associated with longevity or long life, as opposed to fast breathing, where it affects our nervous system. But more on that later. Pranayama is the fourth limb of Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtau meaning eight, the number eight, and Anga meaning limb. And so it is the eight limbs of yoga. It is after asana, where we do the physical poses and movement, and we go deeper and deeper from the gross level to the subtle level. After our breath, we now stand at the gateway of our external world and ready to cross into our internal world. When we have mastered our breath and have understood the workings at the physiological level, then the more subtle aspects, climbing up the higher levels of yoga, such as concentration and meditation, then becomes accessible. In the physiological level, our breath affects our autonomic nervous system. This could look like a lot, but basically, whenever we find ourselves unconsciously with chest or shallow breathing, or when we are in an environment that triggers stress to us and our breath, Our sympathetic nervous system goes on high alert mode. We need this when we find ourselves in danger. Before, in the barbaric era, caveman era, stress can come from fleeing from a tiger or a cheetah that wants to eat us. But now our stressors have evolved into more psychological. Here we see how each part of our nervous system affects the different parts of the body. And our aim is regulating our nervous system where we can lower our stress response and begin to be more resilient and cope better, and upping our parasympathetic nervous system. That way, all our systems of the body can function better, including our mind. In pranayama, we learn to manipulate our breath, and there are three actions we perform. The first is inhalation, which stimulates our system. The next is exhalation, which throws out the toxins. So, be it physical, chemical, emotional, and mental, like anger, sadness, greed, envy, sloth, and all that. Retention of the breath, which distributes the energy throughout the body. We can visualize a square when we breathe. This is known as samavriti, or equal breathing. So let's try that for 5 rounds. Choose the breath count that you are able to lengthen the breath, but comfortable enough that you are not adding stress to yourself. We can start with 3 or 4 counts, which is usually the starting point for most people. And make sure that when you hold the breath, it's at the count that you can comfortably hold without straining. And so let's begin. Sitting up nice and tall with back straight, relax the shoulders, keep the chest open. Start to close the eyes or just have a soft, unfocused gaze. Empty out the breath here, and we begin. Inhale, lengthen for 1, 2, 3. Hold 1, 2, 3. Exhale 1, 2, 3. Hold 1, 2, 3. Inhale 1, 2, 3. Hold the breath at the top. 1, 2, 3. Exhale slowly in 1, 2, 3. Empty out the breath. Retain in 1, 2, 3. Let's increase that count. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3. Relax 4. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Last inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Take a deep breath in, soft the breath, and then exhale. You can start to open the eyes and check how that feels for you. Maybe you felt calm and relaxed, or maybe for some panicky when we try to hold the breath. But observe where your mind was throughout the whole practice. It was in the present moment, fully engaged with what you are doing. Because in retention of the breath, the body is quite smart to distribute first to the vital parts where when our oxygen is cut. where to give and not to give energy in the body. It distributes first to our brain because the mind should be active, then the heart, and so on. And the ancient yogis, these enlightened beings, believe that our mind, our chitta, and prana, our life force, are in constant association. They go together. And focusing on our prana, the chitta is also focused. Why is there a need to discipline or focus the mind? The yogis and even the Buddhist monks would refer to our mind as the monkey mind. Especially now, we are overstimulated. 100 thoughts bombard us every minute, either thinking about the replays of the past or anticipating and worrying about the future. We are never in the moment. When was the last time you were truly in the present moment? If you were playing a video game or cooking or reading a book, when was the last time you were fully engaged in what you were doing and not getting swayed by the backwards and forwards thinking of our mind? And just like anything, our brain needs regular breaks. There's that saying I saw that it goes something like almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. So, as you dive deeper into your meditation practice over time, you begin to realize that the cause of our suffering is our mind. And yet, it is the same mind that liberates us from the chains of our suffering. In the Yoga Sutras, the text, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha Tadadrashvat Swarupe Vashtanam. The translation is complete mastery over the modifications of the mind is called yoga. Then the seer becomes established in its true nature. So the practice of yoga allows us to see the world as it is by training our bodies and minds to stay in the present moment, the only moment where the world exists. The past and the future can only be perceived in our imagination. And so, as we practice being the present moment, we begin to fine tune our perception of the present moment. The term chitta means the mind stuff, the conscious and subconscious, including memories, experiences, conditioned thoughts, habits, instincts, concentration, and inquiry, essentially the lens through which we perceive ourselves and the world around us. While vritti literal means whirlpool. Okay, and in yogic terms refers to the fluctuations of the mind or thought waves. In India, especially the yogic scholars and adepts, they love telling stories and analogies for people to retain the lessons of the metaphysical teachings. There is a lovely metaphor that is commonly used to illustrate the terms chitta, vritti, and self. The metaphor is of a lake where the bottom is our true nature or self, the lake is the chitta, and the state of the water at the surface is the vrittis, the fluctuations. If the top of the lake is covered by ripples or the water is muddy, one will not be able to see the bottom of the lake. However, if the water is still and clear, we can easily see the bottom of that lake. And so the ancient yoga masters ascribe the mind as that which exists between body and soul. The pain of life is not avoidable, but through yoga, the addition of mental suffering, anxiety is mitigated. More simply, with yoga, we learn not to pour salt on our own open wounds, but rather to work on becoming friendlier towards ourselves and more relaxed during uncertainty. And so if you think about the metaphor, the analogy of the lake, the ripples on the lake are affected by the wind and the weather, but the disruption, and even when the ripples become waves, only affects the most external layers of the lake. At some depth, the water becomes undisturbed. However, from above, okay, seeing the depth and stillness of the lake is impossible because the ripples and waves distort the rest of the lake from our view. So when focusing on the ripples, it's easy to forget there is an entire world underneath the surface. Within the stillness of the mind comes relief from suffering and realization of our true nature, our inner divinity. And suffering within the sense of yoga arises from mental anguish and not seeing beyond the illusion and pain of the manifested world. And so, with practice, we learn to remember that at our core, we are not the body nor the mind. Okay. And so, if we go into the layers, the levels of that lake of our mind, in our sitting practice that follows right after, we explore moving from the gross level to the subtle level. So the gross level, the surface level, the waves, the surface would mean the body sensations that we feel as we sit for a considerable amount of time. There may be aches and pains, itchy and scratchy sensations. And to look back at our 8 limbs of yoga, that's the reason why asana comes first, then pranayama and meditation. Because if the body is not functioning well, it creates disturbance in the mind. And the next level, as you dive deeper, would be your thoughts. 100 thoughts can pass through every minute. And can we become aware of them and not being pulled by the current of our thought waves? And then slowly, slowly, these thoughts reduce in quantity until you reach the bottom of that lake where you have only a single thought to concentrate or contemplate on. This is where mantras come into play, where you're only focusing on a certain object for the mind. And eventually, no thought arises, and you are in a state of oneness with everything around you. So, you can use this as a guide as we move through our sitting practice. And I leave you with this final message. So, does this mean that we want the lake, our mind, always to be calm, quiet, and still? No, not necessarily. Just noticing and observing the fluctuations can give us valuable insights into ourselves and allow us to shift how we perceive what is. And during asana or yoga poses and meditation practices, we develop the ability to choose where to place our attention and learn to bring this skill off the mat and into our lives to find greater ease as we awaken to our own true nature. I suggest that moving forward, keep a journal and log in these insights and thoughts from your sitting meditation, whether we're practicing together every week or your own self practice or through Insight Timer. It's always nice to see these thoughts on paper as an outlet to explore our own mind. And so let's begin.